Welcome back to another episode of the Supply Chaney Podcast, where we highlight the experience and expertise of folks throughout the supply chain industry. And today we find ourselves at the intersection of cybersecurity, sustainability, and autonomous vehicles, which, if you don't think we can make all those mash together in one cohesive sort of podcast, well, stick around. We'll see if we can pull it off, I guess. So without further ado, Holly Gardner is the distinguished speaker today, who's going to be talking and walking through her experience and expertise in all of these fields. So Holly, could you take a minute and kind of just give everyone a quick overview of who you are and what you're all about?
Sure. So I think to start off, I'm a very focused environmental scientist to begin with.
Okay.
And so I went to school for many years and have worked in the sustainability sector for most of my career. So I have a PhD in social and ecological sustainability, and a master's degree in sustainability as well. And so that has always been a big driver for everything that I do.
Mm-hmm.
After I finished my time in academia, finishing my degrees up, I started working a lot more in the technology sector. And
Okay.
that included a lot of things around sustainability, but also, as with everything in the world, a lot of things about automation. And so I've been working in autonomous vehicle technology for more than a decade, looking even in the early days of just like integrating sensors, of identifying pathways for better human computer interfaces in the vehicle, and then finally really looking at autonomous driving
Mm-hmm.
through my time with now with NuPort on the leadership team. So, I think some of the interesting things about that have been like that sustainability, it's a major value add
Mm-hmm.
that you get from automation. But one of the biggest and most important things about introducing new technology in that stream is making sure that you're arriving at the safest possible conditions. And I think we all know and we all saw in the emergence of autonomous technology, those early YouTube videos of hackers breaking into infotainment systems and things like that and taking over control of systems. And that really
Uh-huh.
was the precipice for sort of realizing that cybersecurity was now like paramount in these
Yeah,
environments. Does that sort of whet your appetite in terms of like where
it
we're going to go
does.
here?
My interest is piqued. So, before we kind of dig into more, and I really want to dig into the sustainability. I mean, you would be the only person that's ever been on with a PhD in sustainability. So I really want to dig into that. But let's a little bit unpack like who Holly is in the human behind here. So like, where did you grow up? What kind of kid were you? What was
Sure.
your growing up like? And some of those early experiences as a young adult.
Yeah, so I grew up in northern Alberta in a little town called Peace River. Not a lot of people have been there. It's a population about 4,000, give or take.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Very pretty, very isolated, lots of oil and gas development there, as with,
Mm-hmm.
Alberta, lots of farming and lots of, forestry and things like that, the sort of natural resource-based economy. Yeah, I grew up there. As a kid, I was a very focused competitive figure skater. I
Okay.
spent all my time in the rink. I just love skating so much. And, if I wasn't going to be what I am today, I probably would have gone to the Olympics. Well, I
Okay.
mean,
Okay.
if I had made
Cool.
it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not
Yeah,
that competitive, I hear. I don't know why you didn't do that. Man.
right? Yeah, so like as a kid, I was very, very, very focused on going to the rink and landing
Okay.
those jumps. And yeah, and I traveled quite a bit around Canada and the US, training and competing. And
Okay.
so, yeah, I think it was a really good experience. It introduced for me a lot of discipline, focus, but also like just because I came from a really small town, it kind of gave me an avenue to sort of see the world out there and kind of,
Right.
know what was available in the world and, kind of it makes your world a lot bigger, you know.
Yeah, it seems like it was your passport to go explore and kind of expand your horizons then. Um, So then,
Yeah.
so what? At what point, or did you? At what point did you hang up your skates?
Oh, so I probably stopped competing really heavily when I was like 17, kind of age out there at that
Uh-huh.
point. And I really did develop a keen interest on environmental science and advocacy and like those kinds of things because I was immersed in it there, like when you live somewhere with a really intense natural resource development theme, you start
Mm.
to like think about issues around sort of pollution and like decision making and conflicting land use and some of those issues and long term impacts of different kinds of development and things like that. And I think the thing that sort of hardened that focus was I think it was like grade 11. We had to do this project and for biology class. And I remember I started looking at effluent discharges from like the pulp and paper mill. And I started going to the public library and like looking at the reports. They were dot matrix printed like
Uh-huh.
stacks of these numbers and reports. And just like looking at it and just being not really understanding the content really, because I was
Uh-huh.
just too young to like, didn't have the skills and the understanding to really know what I was looking at and like whether that made a difference. But just looking at the volumes and all of those things and being like, how's that allowed? Like, how can that be, right, trying to write my report on, you know, on that. And I think that really sort of set me on that path because I wanted to know what I was looking at. I
Hmm.
wanted to understand it. And so, yeah, that was sort of the changing point for me.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's really fascinating to see how someone's environment that they grow up on, maybe their family dynamics, or the whatever's just in what they're exposed to at an early age can oftentimes influence what it is that they ultimately do with their lives and with their careers. So as you're hanging up your skates, you're starting to kind of like prepare to go out into the world, you're very influenced by all this that you're seeing around you, around the house where you live. So what was your initial kind of plans for schooling and what you thought you wanted to do, when you grow up?
So yeah, I had no plans for schooling, none.
Okay.
I finished high school and I was like, I worked as a bartender and like I was just having fun. And,
Mm-hmm.
I applied to a program they have here in Canada called Katimavik. It's meant to help people sort of understand, like get an idea of what they want to kind of do. It's a
Okay.
year-long program you apply to and you work in different places across the country for like not-for-profits and things like that. And you
Okay.
travel. Yeah, and you're paired with like 10 people from across the country and you live in a house together and you all work in different places. So while I
That's
was like,
cool.
yeah, I was bartending and I'm doing all these things, basically going nowhere.
Yeah.
And that teacher from grade 11 biology was like, you should apply to this program. I ran into him and I won't tell you where. Just kidding. Anyway, so then, yeah, I applied, I got in, and so that sort of like set me on this path of like, working for these not-for-profits. And I lived a little bit in Northern Ontario, a little bit in Montreal, some parts of Nova Scotia, and then I stayed in PEI, Prince Edward Island. Oh, I'm Canadian. Yeah.
Hmm.
So, I stayed there for about a year. And I worked at the environmental network there. I worked on climate change projects while I was there. I got a job looking at home assessments for efficiency and doing all those kinds of things. And then I was like, that came to an end, and I had to buy a plane ticket to go home because my job was done. But I was like, I can't go back there and stay there. Like, what's going to happen?
Hmm.
So I bought a return ticket to Toronto. So like I flew home, it was like Christmas time. Flew home. I called my old boss at the pub and I was like, I need to work like 20 shifts because,
Uh-huh.
you know. And he was like, yeah, he let me. And then I stayed and I just worked and I was like, guys, I'm doing something, I'm not sure what. But I'm flying to Toronto. I reached out to a friend that I had been in Katimavik with. She was living in this town, Peterborough, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna go there and figure it out and go to university.
Hmm.
And so I didn't apply to university. I just like arrived.
Okay.
at that
And
time. And they had this program where you could start university by just doing a couple programs. It was like an accelerated entry program or whatever.
okay.
So I signed up for that and I did 2 courses and I was like, what were they? Anthropology and biology.
Okay.
And so, yeah, I did those 2 courses and then I applied to do my undergrad in environmental science. So like I did my undergrad environmental science there.
Hmm.
After that, yeah, that's how I ended up in academia the first time. Yeah. So I wrapped that up and I was just working on lots of land stewardship stuff and drinking water safety, looking at different kinds of threats and stuff for drinking water. We had a tragic event here in Walkerton, Ontario, where a number of people were died from contaminated water. And it spurred on this whole source water protection program that we have across the province to sort of identify all of the intakes for drinking water and like what risks were there and like how long it would take to shut down the systems and things like that. So we did these massive studies. So I worked on the team doing those studies.
Okay. So
Um,
you did that, and
yeah,
then if I'm looking at your full academic career, you went on to do a master's, and you went on to PhD. So it's really refreshing, or I guess I like I like this story of I didn't really know what I was going to do. I kind of just showed up, and then I ended up doing the most you can possibly do in the world of academia,
right.
all the way through to the end, right? Like it
Yeah,
just kind
I
of felt
was
natural.
Yeah, like after I did my undergrad, I was like, well, thankfully that's done. Like I'm never doing that again. You know, like famous last words.
Never doing that again. Yeah.
Yeah. And then uh so I was doing those drinking water safety studies and we were going around the different watersheds and part of that was like working going into different First Nations communities to kind of see like what their drinking water was looking like. There's some jurisdictional issues in Canada around who's responsible for different kinds of land. So the First Nations communities are considered federal, and then everything else is like outside of national parks and army bases is basically provincial, right? So like the money that we had to do the studies, it didn't allow us to do the First Nations communities
Okay.
that were kind of inside those catchment areas. So I started calling around universities because I was like, is there some university that's doing a study that we can connect with so that we can like leverage what we're doing and make sure we get total coverage? And I'm
Hmm.
calling around universities and I call Queen's University Environmental Science Department and I'm like getting passed around to different departments and different professors. And I end up talking to somebody, Graham Whitelaw, and I said, are you doing any of this? You work on First Nations issues, you know, whatever. And he's like, no, but you could come do a master's degree and do it. And I was like, no, 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 no. I am not
Uh-huh.
doing that again. I learned my lesson the first time. I'm all good on the academia. I'm perfectly okay. Thank you so
Yeah.
much. He's like, no, no, no. Like, I think, like whatever. I was like, I don't really think I'm cut out for that. And I don't know. Like, I don't really want to go back into doing that. And how do people even make a living going to university anyway? And he was like, well, we'll support you. You gotta like do your application. And I was like, they're not gonna accept me. Queens is a pretty good university. Like, they're not gonna accept me. I'm not a stellar student. Like, what's going on?
Hmm.
Anyway, so he's like, no, no, just do it. Trust me. And I was like, okay.
Okay.
So I did it and I got accepted.
Yeah.
Um, to my surprise and horror,
Yeah.
actually. I was like, oh no. No, I have to do it.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
And so
That's fun.
I started doing research on the James Bay coast, which is in northern Ontario, very far north, remote communities, fly in only, ice roads, the whole thing,
Hmm. Yeah.
looking at land use related issues, mostly around participation in decision making, et cetera. And I started doing that. Did my master's degree. I was like, I'm good. The head of the team there was like, you should do a PhD. And I was like, I don't even know anything about PhDs. Like, I don't know like what you're talking about. Like
Yeah.
I had no culture of this in my existence. And so I had no
Right.
idea. And I was like, what do you even do with a PhD anyway? Like, what is the point?
Yeah. Yeah.
He's like, oh, you can be a professor. And I'm like, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Like what
Yeah. Yeah.
else? He's like, you can do anything, you can do whatever you want. And I'm like, well, and I think the economy was not the best. And I really enjoyed like working in the communities up there. Like I loved the people and I loved, like hopefully, trying to make an impact and improve the quality of life while I was doing it. And so it didn't
Yeah.
really feel like I was like immersed in like a university. Like it felt like I was doing because it was very community based.
Yeah.
So I went on and I went to University of Waterloo and I did the PhD.
Hmm.
So
How fun. That's such a fun story. It's just that one foot in front of the other, feeling how it just kind of feels like this organic path that you're on. And it just, yeah,
just happened.
that's tie that into then kind of like your different work sort of engagements or the different roles you're in from like a resume perspective. We just
Yeah.
walked through the education side, I guess.
So yeah, there was a big ecology side, big sustainability side to what I was doing, but also we used a lot of technology. So we were building these giant platforms to sort of gather information to help people participate a little bit more in line with the sort of the regulatory process that was involved for decision making. So we were building these platforms and like trying to like get people to adopt different kinds of technology and things like that and working with technology teams. They liked that part. I liked the technology. It was like a very unknown space to me prior
Hmm.
to that because, I just didn't have any exposure to like working in tech.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
then, yeah, so I mean, I definitely built sort of an interest, I guess, in technology. And then when I finished my PhD, I had a really hard time finding like a job, like
Hmm.
they were like, what do you want? Like, you have a PhD, like, why don't you go work and be a professor? And I'm like, I don't want to be a
Yeah.
professor.
Yeah.
And it's hard, like there's not a lot of opportunities in terms of like supporting First Nations communities to like help them navigate this, like where I could actually like pay my bills. So I was like, I
Hmm.
can't
Right.
really do
Yeah.
this. It's like I can volunteer to do this all day, but like can't I have to, you know, re-enter the workforce.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, so I ended up actually getting hired on in an innovation sort of type of funding agency. And so, like, that started it all because I was just like, I was running programs for startups, I was doing programs for tech, like new tech, and ultimately, like, autonomous driving tech and all of those things. And like, that was just so fascinating. And so, like, I just couldn't get enough of it.
Yeah.
But I also felt like kind of frustrated because as much as interesting and fun as it is to like help people succeed through funding different things, it still felt
Hmm.
like I was sitting on the bench. Like I was
Makes
still,
sense.
like I wasn't really in
Right.
it, and I wanted to like anyway, so yeah,
Yeah.
I ultimately in the end I moved to one of the startups that I was working with and it was a cybersecurity startup. Yeah. And they were
Okay.
working in the autonomous vehicle space at the time and looking at ways to secure the infotainment systems in vehicles and find other sort of value add opportunities that could be used through the different ports within the vehicle to sort of improve things like warranties and updates to firmware and like that kind of thing. So, yeah.
This feel like warranties, firmware, cybersecurity. These were all words that seem to have not have been in your vocabulary just simply a year or two before this time. It feels like.
Yeah, I mean, it was always something that was part of in the funding agency, like the tech startups, they all had like, there was all consideration of like cybersecurity things, and there were cybersecurity companies coming through. So it wasn't completely foreign to me. Like I
Hmm.
definitely like understood some of the concepts and like the intention and the needs. And there was a lot of at the time early emergence of like blockchain and like forming identities and things like that that could be immutable and were more secure and things like that. So I had like a primer on cybersecurity, but I hadn't
Yeah.
dug into it. With this company, I worked a lot in helping them with their research and development and like with securing funding and things like that for other advanced research on things like cybersecurity and like things like that, and
I s-
partnerships with universities and different agencies around the world.
I see.
Um,
I'm
yeah.
curious, just in what we've talked through so far, you must have some words of wisdom for people for young folks who may have been kind of in your shoes, kind of like not exactly sure where life is going to take them, what they should go focus on, what problem they want to solve, what role they want to play in the bigger world. Any like words of advice for those folks that are trying to find
Oh,
their
geez.
where they plug in?
I feel like I'm just going to give you a bunch of like cliche responses there. I'm just going to be
Uh-huh.
like, like life is what happens when you're making other plans. And
Okay, okay, that's fair.
I think, I think I grew up at a time, I don't want to date myself, but like people my parents' age, like they got one job and they had that job for their whole life. My mom
Right.
taught at public school. She had a 35-year career. She she taught at different schools, but I mean like she was a teacher teaching. Like that was her
Yeah.
career.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think I've always sort of thought that was nice, but I have no
Mm-hmm.
idea how somebody could do that for that long because I just don't
Agree.
have
Yeah.
like I could just never be that interested and passionate about like that one
I hear
thing
you.
the whole
You're
time. I'm
just
just not that
preaching
great.
to the choir here.
Yeah,
Yes, yes.
I'm not great with that.
Do you think it's given your, kind of your youth, I think that you're very trained at thinking long and hard about problems and thinking about why. And it feels like it's a societal thing now that our, that younger generations in the workforce now, I feel nobody says I'm looking toward working at this company for my entire career. And I think everyone's like, hey, I love dynamic environments, I like new challenges. I want all this kind of like movement and like the slow, steady progress on one career ladder in one corporation. That seems to be a thing of the past in general across everybody I talk to.
Yeah, totally. And I think for me, I don't even realize it just how much technology has changed just in my lifetime alone, like
Hmm.
we didn't even have email when I was in high school, you know? Like not to date myself, but like, we didn't have cell phones, like any of this stuff. Like
Yeah.
we had dial like it wasn't until I was like out of my undergraduate degree that I had like at home internet,
Yeah.
dial up from the AOL discs.
Right, right. So do you think then maybe the advancement of technology and like just how rapidly things change in our day-to-day lives and in the worlds we live in feeds into like our as kind of a civilization, our interest in always experiencing something new and instant gratification, and if I see something I'm going to go do that because things don't move slowly anymore. I think in the past, like in our parents age and grandparents, like things moved slowly. There was not hockey stick, exponential growth and change always happening, but it feels like that's the case today. Maybe it's affected how we think about our lives and how we go about our careers.
Yeah, I think, probably the best case for that I can think of in something that I witnessed is like when we started working on autonomous vehicle technology funding, the I the ex- the anticipated timeline for actually going from an idea to like having a piece of technology in a car was like something like 7 years. It was
Uh-huh.
lengthy, right? It was like a really long window. And I think today it's like something like 2 years, like it's just condensed and it's so much more like it's so rapid, right?
Right.
So yeah, I think it definitely I think once you catch that bug, you want to see that progress, And so
Yeah.
I think it shapes like how committed you can be to something because if you're not seeing that kind of progress, then you're kind of like, why am I not seeing that progress? Am I part of the reason that progress is not happening? Where are we going wrong here? Other people are doing this. I know they're doing it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. As a little competitive spirit in there, there might be some ice skating coming out in that
There
statement
might
there, I
be.
think. So maybe let's use that as a segue then to what you're doing today. You mentioned that you're involved with NuPort Robotics, and and they kind of specialize in this retrofitting of create autonomous vehicles. I'm curious, Given that you spent time with First Nations and sustainability projects and paper products, back home, what is it about trucking and supply chains and logistics and autonomous vehicles that, you saw from the outside, I guess, that made you want to work in it? And, I think you might have hinted a while ago, like you weren't fully satisfied with just cutting the checks for helping these startups pay the bills, but you wanted to like get your hands in the business, I think.
Yeah, definitely. So Newport is like an ideal scenario for me because the business case for autonomous driving, in my mind, is perfect in the
Okay.
transportation and supply chain space.
Hmm.
You know, and the way Newport is doing it through retrofits is like it's magic for me.
Okay. Can you elaborate on that? Like what makes it magic? What's magical about it?
Well, so you're taking an existing asset, the truck, it's an investment. It's a massive investment.
Hmm.
And, like trucking is so reliant on the market conditions, right? Oh, but you have this asset and you need to use this thing to get your money back, right?
Right.
And it's the driver, not to anyway. So you're not going to just every time new technology comes along say like, oh, that looks interesting, I'm going to go do that.
Uh,
Like I'm going to
yeah.
get rid of this and like go do this. And I love that because they still need to get the value out of that piece of equipment. So for me, the business case around retrofitting these trucks, it just makes perfect sense to me. Like where you wouldn't do this for a passenger vehicle, which has a much shorter timeline, right? Like
Yep.
a transport truck has like, a 15-20 year timeline. It goes through multiple owners. Like the first person buys it, they do like the first million
Hmm.
kilometers or miles, depending on, you know, and then it goes to the second owner, there's an engine rebuild, like it stays on the road, like this kind of thing. So like being able to like build and add technology to keep that system current and competitive and still getting the value back from it is like such an interesting challenge. And it's such a like great way to also work through some of the big challenges related to introducing autonomous technology to like the transportation sector because you need to develop like very reliable software to sort of do that. And so it's not like introducing autonomous driving is not like a question of like we're going to flip the switch. It's like, it's been tested and use cases are added and unpredictable scenarios are added every single day,
Yeah.
to make it, safe and reliable, right? Because that's the paramount thing.
So if I was gonna do like for example, I could hold up, some AirPods or whatnot. If you take a thing that's $50 and it's today's state of the art or $100 or whatever it might be, and you're like, oh, there's a new edition coming out that has AI in it now or whatever, right? And you're like,
Yeah.
okay, I can toss this and go grab another one and grab the latest thing. And yes, there's sustainability repercussions for that because how can I recycle this and get all everything back out of it and bring but it's much harder. It's easier to do with TVs and, headphones and all sort of stuff that I think we're all very accustomed because the technology is so cheap and accessible, sort of, but you can't necessarily do that easily with trucks and large
Ooh.
capital investment items. So there is a really strong business case to how do you take something that you have that you can't just toss in the trash or recycle and go get another one tomorrow. So I think that's like for me, like that's how I paint that picture in my mind. Is there
Yeah.
another way that you think about it?
There's also like the cadence of involved with it, right? You have a fleet operator. They don't just say like, okay, our entire fleet is now 20 years old and we're going to buy a new fleet, right? Like
Uh-huh.
there's a replacement cycle that happens. It's like 5% of the fleet per year, right?
Uh, right.
That kind of thing. But if we're testing and making sure the software is working on that fleet for all of those years preceding up to it, even when, they say like there's actual driverless vehicles available from OEMs, like they're still going to be like, but we have fully integrated this software platform into our entire operation, and we're not going to shift our autonomous driving now to accommodate this 5% of this fleet. We're going to say
Yeah.
like, you have to adopt our software that we're already using, right? Like, I mean,
Mm.
there's something there from like a business perspective that just I want to see how it rolls out. But I mean, in my mind, I think like if we're building the confidence and the stickiness with customers today, then we have a fighting chance of being the sort of the reliable, trusted vendor for technology in the future.
It reminds me of like Southwest Airlines concept of having the same plane platform for their entire fleet, so that all the mechanics are all trained on one particular set of specifications, and it's you have all these great economies of scale because you're doing it for the entire fleet versus having all kinds of different planes and fleets and ages and all this sort of good stuff that you're always uh, that's kind of like the parallel I draw based on what you were just describing.
Yeah, 100%. But I mean, none of it works if we're not cyber secure, one, and none of it works if we're not realizing these environmental outcomes that we're anticipating, too, right? And
Yeah.
social
And
outcomes, right?
you just packaged it all up. There we go. That's how we
Yeah.
just got autonomy, cybersecurity, and sustainability all in one sentence right there. I'm kind of curious. Can you talk a little bit more to, any more sort of inside thoughts or insights on that intersection point and kind of, I think, the place where you find yourself at sustainability and cybersecurity and autonomous vehicles?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, I think the making sure that you're sort of adopting the most advanced cybersecurity practice and models within this development is paramount to building trust with your clients and also with like actually realizing some of the objectives that you have with releasing autonomous driving into these spaces, right? We're not, like the number one priority here is really making sure we're creating a safer environment. And that means our performance indicators, a lot of them revolve around safety, right? It's
Right.
like we want to make sure, because the machinery is so big and so um so like variable, I guess, like depending on the load type and all of these
Hmm.
things, like the physics behind that change. And like we have to have ultimate absolute control at all times, right? So I think that part of it is like a big driving force, but there's also like the aspects of cleaning up a part of the supply chain that is dirty, from like an
Okay.
environmental perspective. Over road transportation, it's like a big producer of GHG emissions. There's like a lot, like there's like everything,
Yeah.
there's a lot of pressure to improve those GHG emissions to like, move towards carbon neutral operations. I think with the introduction of autonomy, we're creating pathways to doing that by improving sort of the wear and tear situation with the vehicles themselves so that we're improving sort of those replacement cycles of like tires and brakes and things like that. We're improving the safety, so less like damage of everything. Low damage, less everything, you know.
Hmm.
Turning corners like acceleration, deceleration, and like much more smoother pattern that is set to that sort of perfect arc to minimize the use of fuel, so it's
Uh-huh.
like prioritized in that way, creating this as perfect as possible scenario for driving the cleanest possible way.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then, and then obviously all of these things are going to be transitioning eventually over to electric vehicle technology, which is great, but like we're making sure that those batteries are going to last a lot longer too. Like it transfers so well to the next set of technology.
Hmm.
And it's just like another jump, another leap towards that carbon neutral vision, right? For everything. So, yeah.
Maybe one or two last questions here that we see in the normal media. We can see like this passenger vehicle autonomous companies out there, and then we also see like the longer over the road, because I think those are the contact points where the general public can come into contact with autonomy, is the passenger vehicles with Waymo and Cruise and that sort of stuff, or the folks doing the long over the road stuff. But Newport's kind of focused in a different area. They're not doing passenger vehicles. They're not doing the long over the road hauls. Where's kind of the focus area, and why do you think that they're kind of going about it the right way?
Yeah, so I mean, that's a like Newport is definitely focused on those natural resource environments that have private roads, different kinds of staging areas, distribution centers, and other kinds of yard operations. There's like a practical reason for that, and that is, like there's not a lot of regulation allowing for autonomous, like heavy trucks to operate on public roads today. But we need to be at the start line for when that happens, you know? And so, like, while we're waiting for that to take shape, we're building this massive number of miles and kilometers of autonomous driving time. And we're doing it in more controlled environments too. So, like yard operations, like there are different scenarios that happen in there, but it's largely a controlled environment. There's not a lot of private vehicles driving around in these yards. There's not a lot of people walking around. So we're able to like really test the equipment and make sure that we're absorbing these different kind of unexpected use cases and scenarios in a staged, gradual way so that
Yeah.
we're confident in the operation, and we're also sharing that with our clients and our customers so that they're confident about it, because there's
Yeah.
a socialization part of releasing this kind of technology in any environment that we can't underestimate.
Right. Right.
Like we are not going to impose this technology in some of these environments without it being there for a very, very long time,
Right.
to sort of people feel comfortable about it. Because right now, if you just release people off the street to like walk around with autonomous vehicles and just said, oh, these are autonomous vehicles, go, they'd be like, what?
Yeah.
Do
Yeah.
what? You know? And you see like where maybe that hasn't been fully explored with some of the passenger vehicle scenarios that you see popping up
Yeah. Yeah.
oftentimes, which does nothing for us because, we have to kind of explain that we're not doing that.
Yeah. Right.
you
Right.
know but yeah, it's definitely it's the right path to like working with that both the social acceptance, the regulatory environment, and making sure the technology is super mature before it enters
Right.
the sort of the public realm.
Bit of
Yeah.
a balancing act going on there.
Yeah.
Well, Holly, thanks for coming on and sharing some of your insights. I really enjoyed hearing about your just the education and how you've kind of just put one step in front of the other and walked all the way to the very, very, very end of the finish line with your kind of education pursuits. Really fascinating. Also hearing about the part where you kind of helped to with startups and with funding and fundraising and all that sort of good stuff, and then decided you wanted to go kind of get your hands in and really be part of the action. So thanks for sharing your story with us here today on Supply Chaney Podcast. Any last words on your part?
Just thank you so much for having me, and I'm always happy to give my wonderful insights anytime you call.
Excellent. All right. Catch you later, Holly.